You are surrounded by fools and it is exhausting. You believe your intelligence is your greatest asset, the tool that allows you to navigate complexity, understand systems, and see patterns invisible to others. Yet this same intelligence often becomes your greatest vulnerability. The modern world constantly repeats a comforting myth: educate the ignorant, reason with the misinformed, and logic will eventually lead everyone to common ground. But reality is far less idealistic. Logic, no matter how precise, is powerless against the fortress of stubborn ignorance. Explaining your mind to someone determined not to understand is not noble. It is intellectual suicide. Throughout history, the most strategic thinkers quietly recognized a ruthless truth about human nature: the ignorant cannot be persuaded by reason, only managed by strategy. There exists a hidden architecture to dealing with people who aggressively cling to ignorance. It is not about proving them wrong. It is about protecting your own energy while allowing their own contradictions to expose themselves. Once you understand this psychological mechanism, you will never again feel drained by an argument that was unwinnable from the beginning. Think about the familiar situation. You sit in a meeting, a family discussion, or a digital argument where someone speaks with absolute certainty about a subject they clearly misunderstand. You feel the pressure build inside your chest as your mind automatically dissects their flawed reasoning. You gather evidence. You construct a perfect argument. With calm precision, you lay out the facts, expecting the light of reason to finally illuminate their perspective. But instead of recognition, you receive resistance. They stare blankly, blink once or twice, and then double down on the exact same claim they made before. The conversation ends with you feeling exhausted, your mental energy depleted, questioning how someone could ignore such obvious logic. This experience confuses intelligent people because they assume everyone operates under the same mental framework. They believe that evidence reshapes opinions and that truth naturally triumphs in debate. Yet this assumption is the very trap that drains them. The painful reality is that most arguments are not about truth at all. They are about psychological dominance. Many individuals argue not to discover accuracy but to protect their identity. When someone with limited understanding expresses confidence, that confidence becomes armor. Any logical challenge threatens their sense of self. To accept correction would mean confronting the terrifying possibility that their worldview is fragile. And the human ego will defend itself with astonishing ferocity. This is why ignorance behaves like an active defense system rather than a passive lack of knowledge. When logic enters the conversation, the ego perceives it as an attack. Emotional reactions activate instantly. The brain prioritizes protecting pride over examining facts. As a result, the more sophisticated your reasoning becomes, the more resistance you trigger. The intelligent person invests enormous mental energy constructing detailed explanations, while the other side invests almost no energy refusing to listen. This imbalance creates a psychological trap. You expend effort building logic while they simply repeat certainty. Over time, they do not defeat you with superior thinking. They defeat you with endurance. They drag you into a battlefield where reason has no value. And when truth holds no currency, the entire conversation becomes a meaningless drain on your cognitive resources. Once you recognize this pattern, a radical shift becomes possible. The goal of interaction with foolish certainty is not to convince the other person. The goal is to avoid becoming trapped in the endless loop of proving what they refuse to examine. The most dangerous mistake intelligent individuals make is assuming that clarity will eventually penetrate stubborn ignorance. In reality, relentless explanation often strengthens the resistance. Instead of confronting foolish ideas directly, the strategic mind understands something far more powerful. Human behavior is driven primarily by emotional momentum rather than rational analysis. When you argue with someone determined to be right, you provide them with friction. Friction fuels their sense of importance. Your frustration validates their belief that their opinion carries weight. Every rebuttal you offer becomes proof that their position deserves attention. The most devastating strategy, therefore, is not confrontation. It is amplification. When someone presents an absurd claim, do not immediately oppose it. Instead, agree so completely that the argument collapses under its own weight. Push their idea forward until its logical consequences become ridiculous. This technique forces them to confront the destination of their own thinking. Imagine a colleague claiming that success requires no effort and that anyone can become wealthy overnight if they simply think positively. The instinctive response is to challenge the claim with statistics, economic realities, and historical evidence. But a far more strategic approach is to lean forward calmly and agree. Tell them they are absolutely correct. Suggest that since success is so effortless, everyone in the room should resign immediately and expect prosperity to appear by the end of the week. In that moment, something remarkable happens. You have not attacked them. You have supported their claim completely. Yet by accelerating the idea to its final conclusion, you expose its absurdity. Their mind suddenly confronts consequences they never considered. They begin backtracking, adding conditions, introducing nuance. Without realizing it, they start arguing against their own original statement. The victory does not come from defeating them with your logic. It comes from allowing their own logic to implode. And the most powerful advantage of this method is that it preserves your mental energy. Instead of fighting in the mud of endless debate, you simply step aside and allow their reasoning to collapse under its own contradictions. But mastering this approach requires a psychological sacrifice. You must abandon the addictive desire to be recognized as correct. Intelligent people often crave acknowledgement of their insight. They want the moment when the other person admits defeat and validates their intelligence. Yet seeking validation from someone committed to ignorance is itself a form of foolishness. When you release the need for recognition, you gain a new form of freedom. You stop giving other people control over your emotional state. Their stubborn beliefs no longer provoke anger or frustration. They become background noise rather than obstacles. And the energy you once spent fighting pointless battles becomes available for pursuits that actually matter. Once you begin observing the dynamics of stubborn ignorance, a darker realization emerges. Foolish thinking is not merely frustrating. It is contagious. The longer you remain trapped in the mental chaos of irrational conversations, the more your own clarity begins to erode. Human attention is a limited resource. When you spend hours attempting to navigate unpredictable reactions, your brain works far beyond its optimal capacity. The constant effort to predict emotional responses, soften explanations, and manage frustration creates an invisible tax on your cognitive system. Over time, this tax reduces your ability to think creatively, make strategic decisions, and maintain emotional composure. You become irritable, distracted, and mentally fatigued. In effect, you are allowing someone else's intellectual limitations to drain your own intellectual strength. Strategic thinkers throughout history recognized this danger and treated their mental environment with ruthless discipline. They understood that the mind adapts to whatever environment it inhabits. If you spend your days surrounded by chaotic reasoning and shallow arguments, your own thinking gradually becomes less precise. The solution is not hatred of people but careful management of psychological distance. Human interaction requires a delicate balance between connection and protection. Too much distance leads to isolation. Too much proximity to irrational minds leads to exhaustion. The solution lies in developing what can be described as a psychological quarantine. When interaction with foolish certainty becomes unavoidable, you do not bring your authentic intellectual self into the conversation. Instead, you operate through a controlled persona. This persona is polite but emotionally detached. It responds with short neutral phrases that neither challenge nor validate deeply flawed arguments. Statements such as, "That's an interesting perspective," or "I understand what you mean," allow the conversation to continue without inviting deeper engagement. The persona functions like a mirror reflecting their words back at them, while your true mind remains protected behind a wall of detachment. From the outside, it appears as though you are participating fully in the discussion. In reality, you are conserving energy and observing patterns. The other person often leaves the interaction satisfied, believing they have won the conversation. But this illusion costs you nothing and saves you immense mental effort. This method may initially feel manipulative or arrogant. Society teaches that every disagreement should be resolved through open debate and that refusing to argue is somehow dishonest. Yet this belief ignores a harsh truth about human psychology. Some individuals are not seeking understanding. They are seeking validation. And when validation is their primary goal, logic becomes irrelevant. Treating every irrational argument as a problem that must be solved places you in a permanent defensive position. Instead, recognize that certain conversations are intellectual hurricanes. Attempting to reason with them is like standing in the middle of a storm trying to negotiate with the wind. The wiser strategy is to close the windows, step back, and allow the storm to exhaust itself. However, the challenge becomes far more complicated when foolish certainty is combined with authority. Many intelligent individuals eventually encounter situations where someone with limited understanding controls resources, promotions, or opportunities. In these circumstances, openly displaying superior insight can trigger insecurity in those who hold power. A person whose authority rests on fragile confidence often perceives intelligence as a threat rather than an asset. When confronted with someone more perceptive than themselves, they may react defensively by undermining that individual's reputation or limiting their influence. In such environments, direct confrontation rarely succeeds. The strategic response is subtle restraint. Intelligence becomes a concealed instrument rather than a visible badge. Instead of constantly demonstrating superior analysis, you allow the authority figure to maintain their sense of control. You occasionally ask for their input on minor issues, allowing them to feel respected and secure. These gestures do not represent surrender. They represent strategic patience. By satisfying the ego of someone insecure in their authority, you reduce their instinct to view you as a rival. This creates space for you to operate effectively behind the scenes, focusing on long-term goals rather than short-term victories in arguments. Pride may resist this approach because it feels like suppressing your capabilities. Yet in many cases, temporary restraint allows far greater influence over time. History repeatedly demonstrates that individuals who survive complex hierarchies are not always the loudest or the most openly brilliant. They are the ones who understand when to reveal intelligence and when to conceal it. Strategic silence often protects opportunities that impulsive honesty would destroy. At the heart of this entire dynamic lies a painful psychological truth. Intelligent individuals often continue engaging with stubborn ignorance not because they believe they will win the argument, but because they feel responsible for correcting it. They imagine that if they could simply explain the truth clearly enough, the other person's life might improve. This impulse feels compassionate, even heroic. Yet it can easily become a destructive form of misplaced empathy. The assumption behind this impulse is that people remain ignorant only because they lack access to clear information. In reality, many individuals reject accurate information not because they cannot understand it but because accepting it would disrupt their identity. Their beliefs are tied to pride, tribal loyalty, and emotional security. Attempting to dismantle those beliefs threatens their psychological stability. When someone's identity is built around certainty, introducing doubt feels like an attack on their survival. That is why attempts to rescue them with logic often provoke hostility rather than gratitude. What appears to be stubbornness is frequently self-protection. Research into cognitive bias reveals an unsettling paradox. The skills required to perform a task competently, often the same skills required to recognize competence in others. Individuals who lack those skills are therefore unable to accurately judge their own limitations. This creates a psychological fortress of confidence unsupported by ability. Inside that fortress they feel secure. Their simplified worldview shields them from the overwhelming complexity of reality. When someone attempts to expose the flaws in their thinking, they experience it not as assistance but as invasion. They defend their beliefs with surprising intensity because those beliefs provide emotional comfort. Recognizing this dynamic forces a difficult emotional adjustment. It means accepting that not everyone wants the clarity you value. Some individuals prefer the stability of familiar illusions. Attempting to drag them into a more complex understanding can damage relationships while achieving nothing. The wiser response is to shift from attempting to upgrade people to simply managing interactions with them. This approach mirrors how engineers handle powerful machinery. They do not expect machines to suddenly operate differently from their design. Instead, they respect the machine's limitations and build safeguards around it. When a machine behaves unpredictably, the solution is not argument but distance. The same principle applies to individuals who repeatedly demonstrate irrational patterns. Expecting them to transform through logic wastes time and energy. Accepting their limitations allows you to focus on protecting your own clarity. Something unexpected happens when you finally abandon the need to correct everyone around you. A profound silence appears in your mental landscape. The arguments disappear. The endless explanations vanish. At first, this silence feels unsettling because much of your identity may have been built around being the person who proves others wrong. Without those battles, you are left confronting a deeper question. What will you do with the energy you once spent fighting pointless debates? This question reveals a surprising truth about many intelligent individuals. They unconsciously surround themselves with people who think poorly because it allows them to feel intellectually superior. Being the most perceptive person in the room creates a comfortable illusion of mastery. Yet it also limits growth. When you withdraw from constant engagement with shallow thinking, you begin seeking environments where your mind is genuinely challenged. This transition can feel lonely at first because fewer people operate at that level of depth. But the reward is extraordinary clarity. Conversations become more meaningful. Ideas develop with greater sophistication. Instead of wasting hours dismantling flawed arguments, you invest time building complex visions and pursuing ambitious goals. Of course, distancing yourself from irrational debates will provoke misunderstanding. Some people will interpret your silence as arrogance. Others will claim you have become distant or uncooperative. Yet these judgments arise from the same flawed perspectives that once fueled endless arguments. Their opinions lose power when you recognize the mental framework behind them. Imagine walking through a building filled with people who perceive reality through distorted lenses. They point at you and criticize your behavior according to rules that only exist within their limited perspective. Would you pause to argue with each of them? Or would you simply continue walking toward your destination? True intellectual maturity emerges when you understand that not every voice deserves equal access to your attention. Attention is the currency of the mind. Where you invest it determines the quality of your thinking, the strength of your creativity, and the direction of your life. When you stop trying to rescue stubborn ignorance, you reclaim that currency. You invest it in learning, building, creating, and pursuing meaningful goals. The world will always contain loud opinions, shallow reasoning, and unshakable confidence built on fragile foundations. But once you understand the mechanics behind those behaviors, they lose their ability to drain you. The ultimate victory is not proving that you are right. The ultimate victory is refusing to waste your life explaining reality to those who have already decided they prefer the comfort of illusion.